Pessoal, bom dia. Hoje nós estamos aqui com o professor Eldar Heide, que participou inclusive já no 10º Colóquio de Estudos Vikings Escandinavos. Ele é professor da Universidade de Ciências Aplicadas da Noruega Ocidental. Ele tem inclusive trabalhos relacionados à mitologia nórdica, filologia norueguesa, entre diversos outros trabalhos que foram publicados. Eu vou passar agora a palavra para ele contar um pouco, né, sobre a trajetória dele nessas questões relacionadas à cultura e religião na era viking. Professor, thank you so much for accepting this invitation. I'd like to
Thank you.
start to question you about how do you start your career in this area of Norse mythology, studies of language in Norway language?
Well, I've always been interested in well, all aspects of history, I should say. So, but when I started at the university, I first took archaeology, and I did that for 3 terms before I realized that I wanted. Well, the archaeologists can give much very valuable information, but mostly about the physical aspects of life, and usually not much about what people thought. So what ideas people had, the ideologies of former times. So I realized I wanted to. Well, that's what I was interested in mostly. So so I turned to philology to study the Old Norse texts.
Oh, that's very very interesting. How do you start studying these type of studies? And I have a question about some of your works, examples. You have a work called The Semantic Development of Germanic. The structure of polybrothers anchors within rectangle queues. How did you the process of doing this work, this article? How do you construction about this the relationship of Old Germanic with Old Norse? How do you do the construction of these two things?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of your question. Are you asking about a specific article?
Yes. I have an article about the semantic development of Germanic. Still Polish ruders anchors with and rectangle queues.
That one, right? Yeah. That started as a place name study. There's certain fjords in Norway. We have or valleys, Stjørdalen and Stjørnfjorden. So where apparently the first element in the name is Old Norse stjori, which is mostly known from Old Norse as a word for a leader, and it's derived from the same root as in English to steer. So and then to steer derives from the word for a side rudder on Viking ships. So some other scholar suggested an interpretation of these stjori names. So, and I've been sailing quite a bit, and also Viking ship replicas. So I tried to make make a link the different semantic spheres. So I realized that, or I suggest in this article that those fjords and valleys next to fjords probably derive their names from a word for a primitive anchor. So, and the defining aspect of those anchors are a pole, which is sharp in the lower end, intended to dig into the bottom of the sea. And so I suggest that because estuary or variations of that word also refer to a side rudder on the ships, and I suggest that well, originally the intention was to in a way anchor the ship to the water while sailing. So because it seems that when we go back to 5th century depictions of ships in Scandinavia, that's before the sail, so that the age of the rowing ships, and at that time the ships had what appears to be steering oars in or side rudders in both ends of the ships, which doesn't really make sense if steering is the point. So instead I suggest that it's the point is to stop the rowing ship from drifting sideways in side winds. It's very different from what has been suggested before, but that's what seems the most plausible to me. So but your question was how I reached this idea, and then well, the answer is I guess the my background as a place name scholar and also as a sailor, using traditional Norwegian boats and Viking ships. So this combination, this combined competence, maybe.
Oh, that's very very interesting. I didn't know that having a lot of relationship with this type of knowledge, because I think it's different when we see this type of development of the relationship of in the language of the old Germanic to old Norse. This is very very interesting to study. And you have a very interesting article called Old Icelandic and Semi-Ancestor Mountains.
Yeah.
What is the relationship with the Sami and the old Icelandic traditions, and the relationship with the after death? How can we say about this type of the relationship with these two traditions?
Yeah, well, I observe that the descriptions of Old Norse ancestor mountains, it's mostly, or the one containing most detail is the one from Øyrbygga Saga, telling about Helgafell in Western Iceland. The description resembles the descriptions of South Sami ancestor mountains that bear the name Saiva in Trøndelag and Nordland and the bordering areas of Sweden. So it's basically that you die into a mountain, and it's a very prominent mountain in the landscape, one that catches people's attentions, and it's apparently it's a family kind of thing. So it's local. It's for the family, or the people in the area, but it seems mostly family. So it's this personal relation that you have to this place, and you can, among the Sami at least, you can wish to go there after death, because there's other places to go, of course. Like in Old Norse tradition, there's Hel and there's Valhall, and yeah, there's Freyja's realm of the dead as well, resembling Valhall. So yeah, that's also a similarity between the South Sami tradition and the Old Norse tradition, that you have these different alternatives to go to after death.
That's very very fascinating. I have a curiosity about that example. The stone circulars made by the Sami people are used by the in the traditions of the Old Norse, or they are only this is just a speculation. What is the possibilities about that?
Stone circles.
Yeah.
So you mean among the Sami?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they are used by in Old Norse traditions of the example in Viking Age.
Yeah. Are you thinking about simple circles of standing stones, or more the labyrinth structures that you find in northern Fennoscandia? Are you talking about simple circles of standing stones?
Yeah, they have a structure of some circular circles that made by the Sami. But I would like to know if the example the populations in the Viking Age use it for ritual traditions, if they have these similarities in cult of some example bloods, or if the Old Norse tradition are connected to the Sami tradition in some point.
Well, I'm afraid I don't know much about Sami stone circles or stone circles in Sami areas. I have this general knowledge that we have such stone circles throughout Scandinavia or Fennoscandia, but and they're apparently reused, so they may date from the Stone Age, but are then redefined and reused by later peoples.
Oh, that's a very very interesting thing, because I want to know if this is really real, that they used some traditions of the Sami and put in the Old Norse traditions. And you participate with in the book Old Norse religion in long-term perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
You write about Spin Seder.
Yeah.
Do you write about that spinning mind inside that Seder was about in a relationship with my I'm sorry. What this is the construction idea of this part in the book about Spin Seder.
I mean, how I got the idea?
Yeah, no, how did you have about the principle, how can I say, sorry, um the relationship with the article with the Seder traditions. How do you explain about Seder uh, in this part of the book?
Mm. Yeah, well, my idea is that Seder, the sorcery form, or the ecstatic form of sorcery that we know as Seder, was essentially about spinning. And it may sound like an odd idea, but there's many arguments supporting that view. But firstly, maybe I should say that to me it seems that the information that we have about Seder has been censored, and then apparently because there was something perverse about Seder, according to the sources. So the Old Norse sources never say what Seder was about. It tells us usually just what the result was, and then in the most detailed description from Eirik Saga Rauda, we get this quite elaborate information about the dress of the sorceress, the Seid Kona, and how she was received. And this Seder seance was about divination. So we get to know the predictions that she makes. But Seder's mentioned many times in the sources, but we are never told what it was really about. So, but then the arguments for the spinning theory. Firstly, the word Seder seems to mean a thread. So modern German Saite is the string of a guitar or other stringed instrument, and then there is that's what led me to what I suggest is this. Well, it's the Seder staffs. It was the work by Neil Price in his doctorate thesis. He discussed the Seder staff that is described in Eirik Saga Rauda. It was made of metal, and it apparently was I think there's a mention of a gemstone or something. So this elaborate metal staff, and then he pointed to the fact that we have found, we know from Viking Age women's grave, quite a number of metal staffs that could match that description. So and then I happened to know that those metal staffs are yeah, those metal staffs are they closely resemble spinning equipment, the distaffs to which the spinning material was attached. So it's really a very close resemblance in the design and the size and shape. So it's really striking. So, but then distaffs made of metal would be cumbersome to use because they would be heavy, so difficult to use, and very expensive. So there wouldn't be much point in using metal distaffs unless it had some specific purpose. So so I suggest that those metal staffs are ritual distaffs used for ritual spinning, and at the same time Seder staffs. And there's much more also about, so for example in late Icelandic tradition there's quite a bit about Seder than Seder, and it's often about pulling. That's also in the Old Norse sources. It's about Seder is usually about attracting resources or people, and that's even more clear in the Icelandic sources, and it's also in some descriptions it's as if people are pulled by an invisible rope to the sorcerer, the Seidr performer. So, and there's also this idea that the spirits sent forth in Seidr, that's Seidr is an ecstatic kind of sorcery. So the sorcerer sends forth either his own free soul or helping spirits, apparently to attract the people or resources that are wanted. And I argue in a different article that, and also in my thesis, that such sent forth spirits could have the shape of a rope that is a whirlwind, because throughout northern Eurasia it's a very frequent motif that whirlwinds are the soul of a sorcerer or sorceress sent forth. And the relationship is so intimate that if you throw a knife into the whirlwind, it will hit the sorcerer back home. So and a whirlwind is a wind rope, you could say, and it can also steal things. It can take away hay or grain and other things. So well, that's the main arguments. Well, there's also, well, it's a multitude of arguments, but these are maybe the most important ones.
Okay, and we can say that Seder are a type of doing some magic stuff in Iceland, but we can say that Seder are used for doing predictions, for doing some different aspects in the involving about the magic beliefs in Old Norse.
Could you repeat that, please?
We can say that Seder I use it for doing some predictions to prediction the future, and use it for multiple magic beliefs stuffs in Old Norse traditions.
Yeah, that's the well, in maybe half the cases, say that it's about attracting people or resources, but then the second most common type is divination. So, and that could also, but that's more speculation, but and more uncertain. But it's that could relate to ideas about a life thread. It seems that the Nornir, the Norns of Old Norse mythology, made a thread of life to each person born, and so it's not entirely clear. The evidence is a bit slim, unfortunately. Whereas in ancient Greek mythology, it's absolutely clear. So it's generally assumed that it was the same in Old Norse mythology. And if we say that this is how it was, then say that as spinning would make good sense, because then we can imagine that the Seder performer spins a thread that represents the thread of life of the person being who wants the divination. So then the sorcerer could study this thread in order to, you see what I mean. That's there's no hard evidence to back up this idea, but it would make sense. And this idea about the theory of Sederan spinning is, I would say, well, it's a theory, but there's a whole bunch of arguments that support it. Whereas the spinning, the divination spinning, that's clearly very uncertain.
Well, that's a very very interesting, because we don't have to ascertain that are used by some predictions, but we know that they are used for other magic stuffs in the Old Norse tradition. And this is very interesting because we see the some points that are very very close to the how can I say, to the documents that know about the Old Norse traditions and the about the magic stuffs in Old Norse, example in Seder, and in that appear in some Eddas and sagas about this type of knowledge. And this is very I think that we need to study much more to understand how this is correct, or all this is speculation. It's a lot of things that we didn't know incomplete about Seder or Galler example. And you have an article that I read that are very very interested about the Viking ships with angular stems, and you work that the tradition of about these ships and the term bait are referring to early sailing ships. If the possibility of the Old Norse say with this word about ships with sailing. How this is correct? We can say that the Viking ships have these angular stems. How did you work the Viking ships in Viking Age, or the Old Norse tradition say in literature or some point about the Viking ships?
So you ask about the ship type bait, and your question was?
Is if the in your story in this case, if the Old Norse, how Old Norse referring about these ships, if the term bait is reveal about how the ships are in the Viking Age, or if the ships with you say here with angular stems are referring about how ships are in the Viking Age. How do you describe about the ships and the how Old Norse referring about them?
Well, I argue that I have this project of linking the terms for ship types that we find in the Old Norse texts, link them to actual finds and depictions of ships from the Viking Age. There's a basic source problem doing that, which is often overlooked because, well, the problem is that the prose, the King's sagas mostly, the prose that we know was written in the 13th and 14th centuries. Is meaning that even though they may have correct information about events in the Viking Age, 2 or 3 centuries earlier, they would not have any way to know much about the material culture of that time. So it's clear that what the authors of the High Middle Ages describe basically are the ship types that they knew from their own time. So I tried to sort the terms for ship types into chronological layers, because like Snorri in the 13th century, he clearly knew about terms for ship types that existed in the Viking Age, or even the early Viking Age. And I tried to sort the terms into chronological layers, and then after that try to link them to actual finds and depictions from that period. And then it seems that there's this ship type bait, which apparently was very early, and then I link that to the etymology is, there's an obvious alternative. The term for tacking, for sailing against the wind, was to beita. So bait, it's easy to think that bait had something to do with tacking. So and then we have this that we see on depictions, where it's a ship type that has never been found, but we have so many depictions, and some of them very realistic and detailed. So it's clear that this ship type existed, and it's so it's the 90-degree angle of below the stems in each end of the ship. There's this 90-degree. You have the curve like this that we know from Viking ships, and then there's, in addition, this 90-degree angle. So boards placed in each end, filling out the room below the curved stems, and then we know from later times that adding such a part of the ship would make the ship drift less sideways when tacking, and similar things have similar details or constructions have been added to sailing ships, sailing craft in later times in order to achieve that. So we should suggest, Terje Planke and I, that this was a very early type of sailing ship, from the very earliest days of sailing, because when you start sailing a rowing ship, you realize this problem of drifting sideways. You can't use those steering oars in both ends anymore. You need something attached to the hull, something more stable and solid. So yeah, that's the argument.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. So it's possible to say that before the Viking Age, we have ships with using sailing or type of sailing.
Well, we don't know when the sail was taken into use by Scandinavians. The Oseberg ship from 805 or something like that, dated dendrochronologically. That's the earliest sailing ship that we know about. And then it's widely believed that the sail was taken into use by the Scandinavians in the 7th century, but we don't really have any hard evidence to back that up. It's whereas in the other end of the time scale, there's the Nydam ship, which is a very well preserved find from present day northern Germany, close to the Danish border, and it's dated to the year 324, and that's clearly a rowing ship. And we also have so that's but then at some point between that, the Scandinavians started to sail, and it's odd because the Romans did sail in the North Sea up until the 5th century at some point. So why the Scandinavians didn't modify their ships to be able to carry sails? It's odd.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. I didn't expect that a possibility of before the Viking Age we have this perspective of the possibilities of ships using sailings. It's a very, very interesting point of view. But I think with your appointments, I was thinking that was have a big possibility of the using of sailings before the Viking Age, not only in a long distance, but in a short distance to the Viking Age, to the Iron Bronze Age, but is I think is a very a great possibility about uh, of using of this stuff in the Viking Age. And I have another article that you use that the contractual Aegir saga and another other twist of the myth of Thor visit to the god Loki. Um, in this article, how the relationship of the Aegir sagas and the myth of the Thor visiting the Utgard Loki.
Yeah, there's the this famous myth of Thor going with Thjalfi and there's Thjalfi and there's Loki. They go to Utgard Loki, who is a very enigmatic figure, but they're in any way they're tricked by him. The three the three gods are tricked by this this giant. So they're deceived and tricked into appearing as, because it's all delusions. So they don't see what they things are not how they appear. So, but in any way, they Thor appears as weak and unable in many ways. So he's really made fun of by the people at Utgard court, but also by the audience, the people who listened to the myth when it was told, and it apparently, yeah, it's turning things upside down. This macho god, super strong, super brave god, made a fool of by the giants. So and that's apparently the point of that myth. It's making good entertainment by turning things upside down. So, and there's we should add the concept of ergi. This it's a term for unmanliness, which was the ultimate shame for a man in Old Norse culture. It was nothing wrong about being a woman, but if you were a man and then were turned by other men into some symbolically being a woman, which Thor was according to Norse Norse ideology in this case. That was the ultimate shame for a man. So yeah, so and then it's a good example of how the Old Norse gods are different from the Christian God. They have all kinds of faults and are imperfect in all kinds of ways, and fail, and yeah. So, but then anyway, that's the point of that story, turning things upside down to make it entertaining. And then I wrote about I argue that there's, in Old Norse literature, there's two twists, two stories that make additional twists to that story. There's first the story of Thorstein's Thorstein Bøjarmagn, the story Thorstein's Thotter Bøjarmagns. It's a Forn Eldar saga, legendary saga, and in that story, Thorstein is weak, and he goes to the giant, but he turns the tables. So he comes out as the winner, and as the dominant guy. And why is that? Well, he's smart, obviously, but what he does more precisely is he controls what the opponents see. So he blinds them and make them see. Well, he controls what they can see. So in that way, his physical strength is enough to for him to win. So that's yeah, it's clearly linked to, as several scholars have pointed out, clearly linked to the myth of Thor and Ulkar's Loki, but then because he controls what is can be seen, he wins. And then there's the saga of the On's saga Borgsveigis, the saga of On, the bow bender, like shooting with bows and arrows. And again, it seems to be a twist on the Thor and Utgard Loki story. But in that case, there's one more alternative, and it appears, and it's even more humiliating, because in that case, the alternative is to accept humiliation, which Thor was not willing to do, but he had to, because he was tricked. But then in Owen's Saga Borgsveigis, the hero willingly accepts humiliation. So he's placed in the situation of ergi, unmanliness, according to Old Norse norms. But he has a plan. So he's really, really patient. He waits for like 20 years, and then he builds up power and followers, and he gets a son who grows up to be a strong hero. So then finally he can strike back. So yeah, but again, that story is clearly linked to the myth of Thor and Utgard Loki.
Well, that's very interesting, because I have a lot of similarities in some points of the myth of EU sagas and the visit of Thor in Utgard Loki, and this is very, very interesting to see this some points that have these similarities one with each other. And do you have a very short I think a very short article that's called "The Vikings in Scandinavia"? How did you consider, as a research, the most important thing of the relationship of the Vikings and the homelands, the Scandinavia? How do you see that is the most perspective that you think that, oh, this is very interesting to know and study about the presence of the Vikings and their relationships with Scandinavia?
I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. The Vikings came from Scandinavia. So what do you mean? The relationship between the Vikings and the Scandinavia?
What do you consider that is the most important thing that was very interesting for to understand and comprehend the Viking Age in the process of the how can I say the establishment in Scandinavia. Example, the cultural process or economic process. How do you consider the most important thing to study about the Viking Age? You have some topic that you consider that, oh, this is the one of the most important things that we have to know about the Viking Age and about the Scandinavia in this time.
Mm. I'm not sure if I have an answer to that, but I can answer about what I have done. Because one question is what would be the most interesting to know. But from my background and with my interests, I've focused on pre-Christian Scandinavian religion and ideology. Pre-Christian will then be the Viking Age, because that's the period that is closest to the time of our sources. The written sources date from the 13th and 14th centuries. So, and then we have, of course, the skaldic poems and Eddic poems that are probably older, but even they only transmitted to us in 13th and 14th century manuscripts. But then in a way, the religion and the ideology I find very interesting and possible also to study with the sources that we have. And then there's the maritime aspects of the Viking Age Scandinavia, and also but then I find equally interesting the high medieval aspects of that. So it's more the development of the maritime technology through a period of, well, like 1,000 years. I mentioned the Nydam ship from 324, and then if you go on 1,000 years from then, that's 1324. So that period, and after that, there's so many things happening in other places in Europe. So, but during that millennium, the major developments happen in Scandinavia. Yeah, and it's possible to say quite a bit new about those developments, making use of or combining the written sources with etymology and the actual ship finds and depictions from the time.
Oh, that's a very very good point of view, because sometimes we saw that that the Vikings, most many people consider that it's important to know the how the start the Viking Age, how the process beginning, but we didn't sometimes forget to saw the some perspective like religions or cultural points that are very intrinsical in the history of the Vikings, and that's I think it's one of the most important things to analyze. And you saw the movie Northman from Robert Eggers.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Did you saw the movie The Northman from Robert Eggers?
I don't think I did.
About the amulet that was described in the account of the Sax Grammaticus, but they did this in the movie from the director Robert Eggers. They made about the Viking Age perspective of this inscription from Sax Grammaticus. If you saw, I will question you about the rituals in the movie, if they are similar to the perspective in the Old Norse inscriptions about. But I don't know if you watch the movie or not.
Sorry, what movie?
The Northman from Robert Eggers.
Yeah, no, I didn't see that. Sorry.
Okay. And you have writing another article that was called Contractor Cosmology in Old Norse Myth and Religion, but it's still a system. How do you have see this contractor cosmology, that Old Norse myth and the religion? Because we see that religion have some different perspectives from the Old Norse myths in the described by Snorri Sturluson, example. And how do you solve the most points that are very, very contradictory in just solve the Old Norse myth in the manuscripts to Old Norse in the religion that was are made in rituals and some other stuffs in the Viking Age?
Sorry, could you repeat the main part of the question, the essence of the question?
I was questioning about the article that you write that called Contractual Cosmology in Old Norse Myth and Religion, but
Yes,
still a system.
yes.
And I would like to know how this the cosmology have you saw that was the most different in to solve the Old Norse myth in the manuscripts or in the some points that are writing after the Viking Age that were very different from the religion that are practiced in the Old Norse societies. How have this difference to see the myth in the writing version and the myth in the real perspective by the rituals? How have this difference between of them?
Well, I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. Well, in that article, I discuss the cosmology. That's the how people imagined the geography of the mythological world, and I argue that there is well, that we misunderstand the sources when we take them too literally, when we try to place the different worlds in relation to each other. I argue that there's only, it's not possible because they were tied to narratives, tied to stories, so that there's only interfaces. the story, the time being, will always be in this world, and then there's the other world, and there's interfaces with the other world, which can be like a cave. You can go into a cave, or you can jump into a well. It's the same in the different mythologies that I know, and in the later popular traditions. Or you can walk the rainbow, or ride through the air across the ocean to where the sun sets, and so on. But then you can go back. No, you don't have, when you go back, you don't have to go the same way. You just go through some other interface. And the place that you come to is not, if you ride through the sky to where the sun sets, or if you jump into water, you don't come to this place in the sea, or under the sea, or underwater. It's a dry land where the cows are bigger and fatter, or maybe they have golden horns, things like that. The grass is greener, but it's a dry world. People breathe the same air as we. So it's just interfaces, and which can be exchanged with each other. So, and the clearest example from Old Norse mythology is when Odin is after the mead of poetry. There's this giant girl called Gunnlod, who guards the mead, and to come to her, he has to bore a hole through a mountain and crawl as a snake through the hole, and then he comes to where she lives. And then he, with the help of tricks, he's able to drink all the mead, and then he wants to go back home, and then he doesn't have to crawl back through the hole in the mountain. He transforms into an eagle, and then he can fly home through the air, unhindered by the mountain. So there's he wasn't underground in that sense. Apparently it was just different interfaces between this world and the other world. And there's a legend from the coast of Norway, northern Norway, in an island way out in the sea. There's the hidden people come there sailing on a ship, but then a brave human, a boy or a young man, is there, and he he throws steel over the hidden people, or shoots with a gun over their heads, which means that they can't stay there any longer, so they have to go back home. And then because he had also thrown steel over the ship, they couldn't use that. So what did they do? Well, they just crawled into a crack in the rock, and apparently could get back home that way. So clearly these interfaces are interchangeable with each other, and I argue that basically in the narratives there's a bubble model. We are inside one bubble. The narrative is always inside this world bubble, and then there's passages out of that bubble. They can be really far away, like when you sail across the ocean to where the sun sets, or you can just jump into a well or something. So it's the borders of the bubble are the borders of it's where it's as far as a human with no supernatural abilities could go in pre-modern times. So that's the outer limits of this bubble. It's how far we could reach as ordinary humans in pre-modern times. But then there's interfaces, passages out from the bubble that people with special skills through where they can pass. So I argue that it's a misunderstanding when we try to place the different worlds in relation to each other, because it's always just this world. That's where the action is taking place, and then it's the other world, and you can go there through those passages. But as soon as you go through one of those passages, you come to what is now this world, and then you can go through the passages and then come to the other world. So it's a shifting focus tied to narratives, and as long as it's only inside the narratives, no problem occurs. So it's yeah. So I believe that we misunderstand the fabric of which the mythology is made.
Okay. I was question about if we have a very big difference between the Old Norse mythology that was doing in the writing by Snorri Sturluson, Saxo Grammat, many writers from the oral versions of the myths. If these are combined or if they are very different, because we don't saw much of the all the events or the dates of about example Skadi or many other goddess that was in right version. They don't appear in some oral traditions. Example, we saw much more in the right tradition. Have one of the most difference between to analyze the Norse mythology in the right version for the oral tradition.
Sorry, what is your question?
It's about the principal difference between if the Old Norse myth in the right version, what is the most difference between the Old Norse myth in the writing and the oral tradition? If they have the same deities, if the same similarities, or if they have a very big difference between when we saw the writing documents from the oral tradition.
Right. Well, it's hard to tell. Snorri's material was the oral tradition. So, but it's hard to know what his sources were. So, in some cases, or many cases, we know that we can see that, okay, he got this information from this stanza in this Eddic poem. That's where he got it from. In other cases, he tells whole long myths where there's no Eddic poem telling the same story. So, but it's essentially the Eddic poems are also oral tradition, and it's been discussed if maybe the Eddic poems were not memorized word by word and then reproduced from memory with an aim of doing it exactly the same as did the person that you learned it from. So some people argue that it could have been more like what we know from South Slavic tradition in the Balkans, where we know from the early decades of the 20th century that there was this tradition of ballads, really long ballads that were sung again and again, but not the same each time. So there was this technique of remembering formulas and the content, and then fixed phrases that were put into an improvisation. So I don't believe that this was the case with the Eddic poems, because they in the versions that we have, there's quite a number of stanzas that clearly are corrupt, and you wouldn't get corrupt stanzas unless people tried to memorize exactly. So whereas if people improvised, it would all be clear and easy and transparent every time. So but and also if we what I said about the cosmology, we when we compare Snorri's information and the information from the Eddic poems with later oral traditions, the similarity is striking regarding the notions about the cosmology. So so it seems to be essentially that, but the degree to which the oral tradition was changed in the recording process, of course, that it's hard to say how much was changed. I used to believe that when Snorri in his Edda places the gods in the sky, I think I argue that in this article about contradictory cosmology, I argue that, well, when Snorri places the gods in the sky, that's Christian influence. I've changed my mind about that. There's quite a bit of information that really connects the gods with the sky. Yeah. Okay.
That's a lot of interesting, because we can know that if we same as Nor use some of the oral structures of the how can I say, about the writings about the to produce some of the traditions of the myths, we can saw that is have a limit about how much Snorri use it from the oral traditions, and how much he use some point of view to create some aspects in the myths. We can saw that have this linear line in relationship of this type of myth, because we have the right myth and the oral tradition myth, but I don't know how much is not used of all oral tradition, or use it some points of view in the to create some parts of the myths. And I have two more questions to asking you. The first is, how much the folklore have a relationship with the Norse myth, the Scandinavian folklore, and the relationship with the Norse myths?
So you mean how much in common?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's regarding narratives. that is mostly legends and well, in folklore, that's legends and folk tales. There are, in many cases, striking overlaps, but I should state, I think that, of course, most of the popular traditions recorded nearly 1,000 years after the conversion obviously were fundamentally changed. So that's out of the question. That's obviously a fact. But so the question is, are there also pieces of information or traditions that survived not much changed? And I believe that the answer to that is yes. And I also believe that in certain cases it's possible to make probable that well, to present explicit and quite strong arguments that this is the case. But so even though we're talking about exceptions from the trend, their number, it's quite it's many cases that we can see that there's continuity, and it's not much changed, and it's possible to make a good case for that. So so that's at least was a controversial aspect of my research into pre-Christian religion. I believe it's becoming less controversial. There's quite a number of people who see this potential, and it's exactly a potential because after about 1950, very few people have tried to use this kind of material in studies of pre-Christian Scandinavian religion. So because of that, there's this untapped potential still. So and for example, I had been studying Old Norse mythology for I think about a decade before I realized that there is an extensive late tradition about the god Loki in Scandinavia, especially eastern and southern Scandinavia, but also in the Faroes and Iceland and Norway. I never heard about it, didn't read about it anywhere because it was out of fashion to know about it, and well, out of fashion not only to use it but also to know about it. So so yeah, but I should stress, I'm not claiming that 19th century folklore was the same as 9th century folklore in Scandinavia. Not at all. It was fundamentally changed, but still, even so, there's quite a bit of well, quite a number of pieces of information and traditions that clearly had remained pretty much the same. And arguments that I use for when I argue that this or that piece of information is ancient, it's often that you can find it in only a few isolated areas far away from each other, like in Swedish Finland. It's an unusually conservative area, so much has survived there that has not survived in the closest parts of Sweden. And there's Dalarna in central northern Sweden. It's very, very conservative. You can hear it from the dialects, or even in that area. And there's even the Älvdalsmål, Elfdalian. Many consider it a language of its own. So it's a really, really conservative area. And then we go to Telemark, Setesdal in Norway, very conservative area, and then Iceland and Faroes also conservative. Then you can find the same ideas, the same traditions in those areas where which have had very, very limited contact after the Viking Age or High Middle Ages. So when you find the same ideas, same traditions in such areas so far apart, it's difficult to explain that if you don't say that these are remains of tradition that was common Scandinavia back in the Viking Age. And there's so many cases, similar cases, where it's very difficult or far-fetched to explain what you find as the result of spreading or contact in post-medieval times.
Well, that's a lot fascinating, because you saw that have some areas that traditions doesn't change so much compared to the Viking Age. They maintained some traditions to the past days, to the new days that we live. That's very, very interesting. I didn't expect that this was possible, that have some communities that maintain some traditions that was since the past to nowadays. And my last question is about how was a ship in the Viking Age? How do you have a lot of works about ships in the Viking Age? And I really want to know, in your perspective, how do you consider how was construction of a ship? What they have in the Viking Age? What is a Viking ship?
Well, it's often said that the ships used for the Viking raids, of course, they were seaworthy, but also light, shallow, and swift, so that well, the raiders could easily escape after the raids. But again, we have to remember, well, I mentioned this millennium from 324 to 1324, and the development that took place. And it's when we read the Old Norse sources, the sagas, king sagas, it's easy to phone call. It's easy to get the impression that there was this Old Norse technological period, but meaning that the ships were the same in 850 and 1250, but that's so far from the truth, because there was this. If you go from 324 and 5 centuries onwards, you get the Oseberg ship, which is very, very different, very much developed from what we see in the Nydam ship. And then if you continue another 500 years, you find something completely different. Then you get to a phase of it's more about floating castles, and sea battles are fought between floating castles with the hulls are very high with thick planking, and then there's fighting towers, so like literal floating castles, and it's this competition to build the highest ships with the highest towers from where you can throw your weapons and rocks as well down on the enemy. So whereas in the early Viking Age, I mentioned the swift ships. So there was this. If we limit ourselves to the Viking Age, there was also this very very large development. So the small, shallow, swift ships in the early Viking Age, but then when we come to the early 11th century, what we find, the archaeologists in Denmark have found, the ships are still shallow, but they're very long. So that the long serpent cannot have been how Snorri describes it as a floating castle. It must have been a ship type that fits with a name like the Long Serpent. So really, really long and narrow ships that you can also use to land on long, shallow beaches, like in the British Isles and Normandy, or elsewhere in France or in northern Germany. But then in the in the 11th century, the latest phase of the Viking Age, it's no longer small bands of unorganized warriors. Then it's the king of Denmark, the king of Norway, the king of Normandy, going with whole armies, which they need to transport across the ocean. So it's it's a very different type of ship in the end of the Viking Age. And also in the early Viking Age, probably there were no specialized cargo ships. There were small all-round ships, and one reason for that is that the later kingdoms did not have a monopoly of power, so that or monopoly of force, so that if you sailed from like the White Sea in northwestern present-day Russia along the coast of Norway and wanted to go to northern Germany or the British Isles or something, you would need a ship full of warriors to protect your cargo. Whereas when we enter the High Middle Ages, you didn't have to bother about that, because as much at least, because there would be a centralized kingdom that had a monopoly of force. So, but then in the early Viking Age, you would need an all-round ship to transport your your goods, and you would need warriors to protect it.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. This difference between the um, the landscape from Kinar, from some of the types of ships in the Viking Age. It's very different, because we see the bio tapestry. The Normans have some type of ships that remember the some like the courtship funeral ships, like the Ulsberg, and that's a very the similarities was passing through the centuries from the descendants of the Vikings, and this is very, very different to see. And a very, very interesting thing to know about these types of ships using the Viking Age, because you have the perspective that they only use one type of ships in movie series, and it's a very important to know the difference between this type of vessels. And Professor, thank you so much for being here in the channel. It's a pleasure to receiving you. It's an honor. I watching your presentation in the 10 SEV Colloquial de Estudos Vikings and Scandinavians
Right.
in Brazil. With it's an event here in doing international event that you participate, that I watching you. That was a very, very interesting presentation. And
Well, thank you for having me on the show. Thank you.
thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.